I'm going to read a story to you from the Bible that, and it's on your sheet beside you, so feel free to just grab a sheet beside you and kind of hang on as we read through here. And then I'm going to share some observations from this. The word in between, if you want to call it a word, it's kind of is an interesting word, and and so we had kind of an argument, not a good argument, a good discussion in our staff meeting earlier this week about in between versus between, and so first of all they said, well, why are you using in between instead of just between? And I said, well, because I like in between better. That's number one. I like in between. And they said, but what does it mean? And I said, well, you tell me what between means. And so they started giving me their definitions of what between means, and I don't remember if anybody was using their technology or not. And then I said, well, now tell me what in between means. So looking and thinking and puzzling around, and they're kind of come together. They're very much alike. Actually, in between sort of a specific byproduct of between. And so it more specifically states whenever you're something's here and something's there, you're in between it. You're also between it, but in between's more specific. You wouldn't believe how many definitions the word between, how many ways. I think there's like 8 different kind of uses for it in different kinds of scenarios. We have enough money between us, Tony, to go and do this. That means we both have ownership of it. Anyway, all kinds of things. But you can't say we have enough money in between us, because then we wouldn't have access to it. It's in between us. But anyway, you understand what I'm saying. So I'm talking about in between. There's A over here, there's B over here, you're in between. That's what I'm talking about this morning. Today, we're in between Christmas and New Year's, and in this in-between time, in-between place, is pretty important what we do, because actually a lot of life is what I believe in between. It's in between point A and point B. Now, let's look and say, and look at the scripture lesson, and we'll break out some of the things we want to talk to you about. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey. Now, let me just give you a context here, okay? Before I dive into the scripture, I want to give you the idea. Really, if you look at this whole passage, chapter 25, you find in the early part it's talking about the virgins being ready with their lamps burning and that kind of thing. Some were, some weren't, and that kind of. And then this, and then it goes to the sheep and the goats in chapter 25. How God will separate them in the judgment. The sheep on one side, the goats on the other. And the basis, in fact, the basis for that is based on the fact that these people did things to help people who were impoverished, who were needy, who were imprisoned. There were various things that basically in that sheep and goat scenario that they were divided. And so some people were shocked that they were a sheep because they had done these things. Other people were shocked that they weren't a sheep, even because but they hadn't done those things. And so, but I'm not preaching about those things, but here's what I would tell you. And the whole context is it has to do with being ready. Being ready, because someday we're going to stand before God, given an account. So this is kind of lodged right in between this story, right in between of all this. And so understand that's the overall theme going on here in the scripture. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Why don't you underline that phrase right there? Each according to his ability. He didn't give somebody more than they were capable of handling. He didn't give somebody less than they were capable of handling. He gave them according to their ability. So underline that if you would. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once. Went at once. Maybe you want to underline that phrase right there, okay? Because these are things we're going to talk about a little bit. Went at once. He didn't procrastinate. He didn't put it off. He didn't come up with excuses. He didn't say, well, I need to take care of all these other things. It says he went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. Maybe underline that phrase, or however you want to denote it, highlight it, gained 2 more. Doesn't say how fast he did it or anything else, but it does say he gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground. Underline that, please, or at least identify it somehow, and hid his master's money. He dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, verse 19, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts. I would just circle the word returned and settled accounts. Do you believe if Jesus came, we just have celebrated his birth, see, the Bible's just as clear that he's coming again. And it may not be in our lifetime. I'm not one of those who likes to put dates on it and all that kind of stuff. I'm always fascinated by everybody's graphs and how they know exactly. The only thing that I've always found is that Jesus himself said that no one would know the day and the hour. So I'm not going to really spend a lot of time wasting my time on figuring something out that Jesus said I wasn't going to know anyway. And if I'd been really bad when I was young and my conscience was bad and I was afraid Jesus was coming, I'd go, I believe Jesus is coming today, just so he wouldn't come today so I'd have another chance. Anyway, that was real legalistic of me, wasn't it? So I knew even as a kid, I wouldn't know. I didn't know when he was coming back because Jesus said we didn't know. But here's the deal. The Bible does say he's coming back and he will settle accounts. And so after a long time, the master of the servants returned, please circle, settled accounts with him. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, for these are words we all want to hear when we stand before God. Well done, good and faithful servant. Whew. If nothing will bring you to the ground fast, anything will be if you hear those words. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. Maybe you want to just somehow identify the few things. Been faithful with just a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. You've demonstrated that you are trustworthy, basically, is what he's saying. And then he says, come and share your master's happiness. Now, I want you to pay attention to that because there's going to be something said about this master that does not sound like this master has any happiness to give. He says to this servant, come and share my happiness. Then 22, the man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, hear those words again. Now remember, one had 5, one had 2, but they both had doubled. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things again. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. I mean, the exact same response. The only thing that was similar was doubling, that they doubled. They had increased, it had gained. But obviously, there's a pretty big difference between 10 bags and 4 bags. But still, in the midst of that, the master said the same thing to them. Remember, going back up, he gave them each according to their ability. Come and share your master's happiness. Then, verse 24, the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said. Now listen to these words. I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. Here, this is a side note. This isn't the main part of the message, but this is a side note. If you have to start your conversation with someone by explaining yourself, you probably are already in trouble. You know, if you're always having to give an explanation. Now, let me explain to you. I know why I'm late. I knew that you would want Dunkin' Donuts coffee, so I drove through, took the time to go through. I wasn't planning on it, but then I thought I would do that so that all of a sudden it's about me. Now all of a sudden you're late because of me? See, this guy, he didn't do anything, but all of a sudden it's not because of him, it's because of his master. See, I knew, Master, just how tough of a guy you are. I knew I knew that you're hard to please, you're difficult. So, well, I just went and hid it. Now think about that. Think about what he's saying. Sometimes people have a hard time viewing the master as Jesus because of these words. But let me explain this to you. Just because that man said that about Jesus did not mean that's who Jesus was. And you go, well, let's read on and let's see here. And let's read on. Verse 26. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. You know, we could imagine him saying lazy, but wicked? Wicked? That's a pretty harsh indictment. You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the banker so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Now, just because Jesus is saying this master said this does not mean the master is saying that's who I am. There's no indication that says he's going, well, yeah, that's exactly how I am. But since that's how you viewed me, for crying out loud, wouldn't it have at least caused you to go do something with it? Which he just is exposing that this guy's making excuses for a lack of diligence, a lack of willingness to do what he was supposed to do. Verse 28. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. Well, this sounds, I know, depending on how familiar you are with Jesus and the Bible and all that, you're going, wow, well, this guy, he's left with nothing. Isn't that harsh? Isn't that hard? Well, don't interpret that to mean that God doesn't care about people who are needy or people who are poor, because if you keep reading in chapter 25, you're going to see people who gave water to people who were thirsty, people who visited those in prison, people who gave clothes to those who had no clothes. That was one of the indicators of how they were sheep. They belonged to God. And so he's not saying, he's talking about somebody who was absolutely negligent, who had opportunity and squandered and wasted the opportunity, did nothing with that opportunity, did not live up to the ability that he had because the master gave him according to his ability. His ability, obviously the master saw ability in him, something more than using a shovel to go dig a hole and bury this treasure. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them, and throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, I'm not here to have a debate about whether that specifically was hell or not or anything like that. Obviously, there's some references to hell that sound very much like that. But at least he's thrown to a place, he's on the outside. He's in a place of deep sorrow. He is a place separated from his master. He can no longer have access. He has given up his place at the table, so to speak, by his lack of willingness to do what he was responsible to do. Now, you say, what does this have to do with in between, Rod? Well, it has a lot to do with it because I believe a lot of life is actually lived in the in-between. In the story, the in-between here is when the master gave them the money and left, and when he came back. The in-between was in between him going and him coming back. That's point A and point B. You know, have you ever said, well, I just need a reliable used car. We have a nice family car. I just need a reliable used car to get me from point A to point, all I need is something to get me from point A to point B. Now, here I have a little bit of an extra that I'd like to put onto that. I don't mind, driving Dave Ramsey junker car if I need to or that kind of thing. I don't have a problem with that. But here's what I would say is, if possible, I would like for it to be, a junker that can get me from point A to point B, but in that in-between time, it wouldn't be bad if I had air conditioning, heating, and a radio that worked. Now, that might make the in-between time a little nicer, okay? Because you are going just to point A, but you got to ride in that thing from point A to point B. You got to spend time there. And that's how life is. We live kind of for the point A's and the point B's and the point C's and all the other destinations of life. But there's a lot of life that is lived in that in-between time. I mean, you would talk a little bit about some of these, but sleeping is kind of an in-between time. We'll come back to that. Working can be an in-between time. Being at home can be an in-between time if you love your work more than being at home. If that could be a problem, so if we need to talk about it, let me know. But various things in life we're in those in-between. We're in between point A and point B. What do we do with all of that in-between time? Because there's a lot of it in our lives. And I would say this, what happens in between determines how the main events go. What you do in preparation, what you do in effectiveness, what you do with your life in the in-between times will affect how A and B actually live out. In this story, we have A man leaving, B, a man returning. But there's this in-between time. In this in-between time, there are 3 men who have been entrusted with his wealth. And one of them has this 5 bags of gold. He went at once, as we mentioned. One has 2 bags of gold. He went and gained 2 more. And then the other one had 1 bag, and he dug a hole and hid it. Now remember what we said. He gave them according to their ability. And here's what I want to just remind you of this. God doesn't expect any more from you than what he's given you the ability to do. But he also doesn't expect any less from you or from me than what he's given us the ability to do. And oftentimes, we don't always accept that or embrace that, and when we don't, then we find ourselves living in a less than satisfactory way for ourselves, for other people, and for God. And so let me just say this, and because it's oftentimes here's the kind of mindset that we get into, and that is we are responsible for what we have been given, not what we don't have. You'll hear people say things like this. Well, if, how do you like that little word that has such big implications? Well, if I had more money, I'd be generous. I would pay my tithe. I would do this. I would do that. You know what? You're not responsible for what you don't have. You're only responsible for what you do have and what you do with what you have. Well, if I had more time, I know you know this, but I just need to go ahead and let you know, remind you. Turn to the person next to you and say, you have exactly the same amount of time I have. Go ahead and say it. I know it's hard. You have exactly the same amount of time I have. We all have the same amount of time. So don't expect more time. Now, some people are going to live longer than other people, okay? And so in that sense, you might get more time. But I'm talking about in today, in the meantime, or in between, a day still 24 hours. Some people do a much better job of using that 24 hours than others. Because, anyway, I'll probably talk about how we use our time more in just a few minutes. If I had more time. We look at other people and they seem to have achieved a whole lot more than us or done something. We're going, well, if I had more time, Really? Listen to what you're saying. Well, if I had more people. What do you mean people? I mean, if I had more people helping me, if I had more people on my team, if I had more people that would come alongside me, if I had more people who were. God didn't ask you to be responsible for what you don't have. He says be responsible for what you do have. Oh, well, now if I had influence like that person, if I just had more influence, do you know how that person got influence? By doing the right things in between. By being the kind of person other people kind of wanted to be like. People don't have influence just because they wake up one morning and decide they're going to have influence. People have influence because of how they live their lives. Sometimes people will have influence because of a position, but I'm just going to tell you the people around those people who are operating only on a position basis, if they're operating by that alone, they are not liked at all. I don't care if you're a CEO of a company and you're operating just surely out of your position, or if you're a supervisor on a job, or if you're owner of a company and you're operating out of that position, you will drive people nuts, and they won't like you at all, because influence has more to do with people saying, I want to follow that person. I want to learn from that person. I want to find out why that works so well for that person. So influence is a time whenever actually people start coming to you. You may even have to start discerning who all and what all do I talk to. Influence isn't something you go buy. Influence is something that comes out of a life well lived. So if you don't have influence, first of all, you're not responsible for the influence you don't have. You are responsible for the influence you do have. Secondly, don't think that you can be just like somebody else just because they have it. Well, if I had more connections, see that person right there, they have an uncle that's this person, and they have a brother that's like that, and they have their dad owns this over here, and they've got all these connections. You're not responsible for all their connections. You're responsible for your connections. What are you doing with what you have, not what you don't have? See, we also impose our inaction onto other people's character. This guy who didn't do anything except dig a hole and bury it, he goes, well, I knew you were a hard man. Don't you like it when people start telling you who you are and they don't even know you that well? Like, well, you're like this, and I'm like, whoa, time out. Whoa. Since when did you get the tea leaves or something, and you can sit in here and tell everybody exactly what they are, what they're not. Why don't you just talk about yourself? But you don't know how I grew up. You don't know the parents I had. You don't know the brother I had. All those things can affect us deeply. But there comes a point when we grow up, we have to take responsibility for our own actions. We maybe can't control the fact that our grown-up years wasn't as good as somebody else's, that we didn't have some of the opportunities somebody else. But now we're grown adult, we take responsibility. We try to understand what is it that God wants me to be busy about doing, and get busy doing that, and quit worrying about pointing your finger at other people. I could have done better. I would have done better. I should have done better, but you know who my family is, don't you? You know who my boss is, don't you? You know who my spouse is, don't you? You know their problems? See, I could do better, but quit imposing your inaction onto other people's character. Another thing that happens is we take the route of least resistance and are puzzled that we wind up in the ditch. You know where most water that takes the route of least resistance goes? It goes to the ditch. It finds its way to some kind of a ditch and some way to a creek and wherever, and it goes. When you take the route of least resistance, do not be surprised that you land up in Shantytown, okay? The route of least resistance will get you someplace, but it will rarely get you where you need to go, or where you're destined to go, or where God's called you to go. The route of least resistance literally takes the power out of your hands, even though it's an easy ride. It's an easy ride, but you never are happy with the destination, or rarely, I should say. And so I want to encourage us, really, I know it sounds like I'm preaching at you hard right now or whatever, like, quit doing this, do that. I'm going to give you some encouragement. Because what I want to remind you that I do want to have us take a hard look, because if we don't take an honest hard look at this stuff, what can happen is we'll just go into 2015, we'll come out with the same results as the other end, and we'll wonder why it happened again. We'll wonder why our boss overlooked us again. We'll wonder why things didn't go so well at home again. We'll wonder why we're more in debt than we were last year. We'll wonder why we didn't develop this character trait that we hoped to develop. We'll wonder why. And I'd like to take some of that wonder away and give us some specific things. Say, let's identify some things that keep tripping us up, keep causing a problem. Let's stop blaming anybody else. Let's take personal responsibility, and let's understand that God has given each of us according to our ability. And I want to just remind you, most of life is lived in between. Most of it is. The A's and the B's are the occasional events that come along, but most of life is lived in between. And so what I want to do is give you some suggestions for best use of the in-between. Now, I wish I could sit here and give you the 5 things that the guy with 5 talents did. The main thing I know is he didn't procrastinate. He went right at it. He's going, I mean, I got to make hay while the sun is shining, because I'm not sure when this guy is coming back, and I want to handle his money right. The next guy obviously had due diligence. I don't know if he started that day or not, but he carried through. He was a plotter, maybe. He carried through. So what we know is these guys followed through. They made use of this in-between time, we know. The other one just wrote it out. He's just like, I think all of us have had a season or two in life where we've kind of sat back and gone, I'm just going to try to survive 2015. It could have been 2000. It could have been 2012. It could have been 2008. Whatever year it was, you're just going, I'm going to try to survive this year. There are circumstances that are so harsh that might be all you end up doing. But I would also say this: if you use that in between time, and you may not have accomplished what you wanted to financially, you may not have accomplished what you wanted to in some other areas, but internally you will have changed because of how you lived in those in-between times. And so I'm going to give you some suggestions for best use of in-between. The first one is this. Now remember, the in-between time we're kind of focusing on right now is where Christmas is over. And hopefully, I just hope and pray, Tom tried his best, I know, to encourage everybody, don't go over your budget for this Christmas. Please don't go over your budget. If you did, you did, okay? But so we'll just work on the other end here. But hopefully nobody did, and so hopefully nobody's having to look back in that sense. But here's what the first thing is as you're kind of approaching the year. I would just say reflect. You have to start by reflecting. In this in-between time, between now and, say, next Sunday, take some time to reflect. What does reflection do? What do you reflect on? Kind of take an evaluation of where you've been. What this last year? What have I learned this last year? What do I want to change about this last year? What worked well? What didn't work so well? What are some things that I feel like I just spun my wheels the whole year? What are things that I feel like I dug a hole, so to speak, this past year? What are things that went well? And so just do kind of a brief evaluation. You go, well, I don't know if I'll think of everything. I'll tell you this: if it's important or it matters, you'll think of it. Just, I'm a yellow pad guy, and so you may be an iPad guy or whatever, whatever it is, but jot down some things about this past year that you can evaluate a little bit and be honest and just be willing to say, I went and dug a hole and stuck my head in it and totally ignored that situation over there. I'm not going to do that in 2015. Because sometimes people don't just stick treasure in a hole. Sometimes they do stick their head in the hole and whistle Dixie the whole time and think it's all going to work out just fine. And rarely does that happen. So the second part of reflection is then look ahead to where you're going. Just look ahead to where you're going. And you say, well, what about that? Well, what about it? What's important coming up this year? What are the basics, the basic scenarios that you might face or you have coming at you? You might have a couple of big A or B events. So those are big pieces. So what are you doing up till the A? What are you doing past the A to the B? What are you doing in that in-between time? What are you doing in order to make those events what they ought to be? But don't just live for the A's and B's. You have to live in the in-between. So part of that is reflecting. This week, please reflect. Reflect about where you've been, evaluation of where you've been, looking ahead to where you're going. Then another thing that I would recommend is that you rest. If you have a couple days off this week or even a day off this week that's not regularly on your schedule, take a little bit of time to rest. You say, have you been in my house? Well, then, go someplace else to rest, just make sure it's an okay place, but rest. Do something that makes you feel rested, even if it's just for an hour or two. Rest. And the next one is recharge. Recharge. Now, recharging, there's probably not enough time to fully recharge in this downtime this week, whatever downtime you have. But what I would say is, I want this to be a template for any in-between time. For a week that feels like it's an in-between time. Whatever your point A's and point B's in those in-between times, after work or before work or whatever it might be, how do you recharge? Because if you don't recharge, what will happen is you will not be the Energizer Bunny. You will be the one who's like, you're always like, I never can keep up. I'm always behind. always feel like I'm always running behind. I'm always And you know what? And there are seasons of life. I mean, some of you guys have a lot of young kids at home. And I'm just going to tell you, you might have to say, this season I'm investing in raising children. That is my in-between time. I'm raising kids. And so that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's a good thing. We want you to raise good kids. So raise good kids and, bring them up in a great way. That's awesome. That's a good thing. So don't beat yourself up because, well, I feel like I'm doing just, everything from changing diapers to warming up bottles to getting up in the middle of the night and, whatever. I mean, we have a number of folks that you're in that season. That's where you are in this in-between time. And so be there. That's okay. Embrace it. But you do still need to try to find some spots to recharge a little bit. What would be the things you would expect me to say that might recharge you in your life? What would be some things you would say? I'm sure Pastor Rod's going to announce this today as you go into the new year. These are the things you ought to do to recharge. What are some of them? I mean, some of them are so obvious, I don't even know if I should say them or not. Oh, maybe it isn't that obvious. Okay. I think if I get you started in the right track, you probably will understand. Read your Bible. For crying out loud. That's my new phrase, by the way. For crying out loud, read your Bible. I mean, if you don't read your Bible, how are you going to recharge? You go, I don't understand the Bible. Then please get a study Bible. If you can't afford a study Bible, we'll take up an offering. No, we occasionally have benevolence money. We'll get you a Bible, okay? We will buy you a Bible. So if you don't have one with good study notes, get one with good study notes because it will take the stuff that's cloudy in your head as you're reading it to help make sense. So yeah, read your Bible. And when I say that, I don't mean that demean. I'm just simply saying it is a way to recharge. Now you go, well, but that's just one more thing I have to do. If you look at it that way, then you probably won't recharge. You'll probably feel depleted after being plugged in. But the reality is, if you'll just let it speak to you, a piece at a time, a day at a time, you'll begin to find that it's strength to your spirit. It's strength to your emotions. It's strength to you as a person. You end up become stronger because of it. What's another one? Prayer. Someone said prayer over here. I'll come back to you. I didn't catch what you said, but prayer. And let me just say, sometimes please don't mystify prayer. I'm not saying there's never anything mystical about it, but prayer is talking to God just like you would talk to somebody else. I don't want to get into my great-grandfather and all that stuff, but I'm just simply saying if you can learn to converse with God in a normal voice, in a normal way, under normal circumstances, it will change your life. Because he's always with you. If you're born again, he placed his spirit in your life. He's always with you. You can talk to him at any time, at any place, and under any circumstances. I talk to God in ways that probably would somebody going, you really say that to God or whatever? I mean, I'm sitting beside somebody in traffic and I'm going, man, God, I know you love that person, but I need help right now. We just talk about everything, it's not always just like some prayer, like, oh, dear God, help so-and-so. And it's just like life. It's life. I view that God is with me. And so we can talk about anything, just like as if my wife was riding in the car. We're going to talk. And if you can just talk with God, it doesn't have to be something mystical or something that you have to have. If you have a place that's sacred, go do that. But please take him with you for the day. Talk to him through the day. Annie, what were you saying?
I was saying, be still and meditate upon the word.
Now we're starting to get into the disciplines here, Be still back here. Pardon me? Okay, I thought someone raised their hand back here. Fellowship? Absolutely. Man, there's nothing like getting around some other people who energize you and encourage you and love on you. Nothing like it in all the world. We hope that happens every Sunday here for you, that you feel loved. That gang of guys out front there, don't let them intimidate you at all. They're just a bunch of crybabies. They're all a bunch of crybabies. And if you want to cry, you can cry. You can just tell them, hey, I got something going on I need to cry about. They'll cry with you, the whole bunch of them. They're great. They're wonderful. They love you. We want women to go out there, but it looks like a guy's gang out there. But I promise you, they're softies, okay? There's all a bunch of softies, and they love to cry. So ask them to cry with you. So the spiritual disciplines, fasting, all those other, we're not going to list them all out, but anything that causes you to be more aware of the reality of God in your life and that you're submitted to him will recharge you. Another one is writing. right. Because I was talking to someone this morning about how now sometimes I have to ask someone their name. When I was younger, I never had to ask somebody twice their name. But sometimes I have to ask up to 3 times. So don't be offended. It's just a stage of life, you know. And all the best Dale Carnegie and all those other techniques still sometimes fail me, okay? So I'm not perfect at that anymore. So sometimes I find I have to write stuff down. Now, the only problem is if you're not careful, you'll write stuff down and then you'll what? Forget where you wrote it. Or you won't put enough information. Sometimes I write down phone numbers right in the moment. I'm going, okay, write that down. Then later I'll come back and go, whose phone number is that? I have no idea. So if it's really, I think it might be important, I go ahead and call them and go, who am I speaking with? Like, you know, trying to make it sound like, anyway, whatever. You have all kinds of games you have to play. But write stuff down, make sure it's enough. But I would also recommend that you write it either in a journal or in a notebook, make your own notebook, whatever it is. There's some, you know, I have my own ways of doing it. It doesn't work for everybody else. So you find your own way, but write down. And one of the things I would encourage you at this time of the year to do is write out your budget for 2015. Write out your budget. You go, budget's a dirty word. I'm not going to do a Dave Ramsey seminar. I'm not going to, I leave that stuff to Tom and Greg and Larry and Karen and some of the others. They do a great job with that stuff and helping people out their budgets. But I'm just going to tell you, a budget may be your best friend. Please think seriously about writing a budget out. And I'm not just saying this. I'm in the middle. Vanjie thought she was wanting me to play a game with her and the kids a couple nights ago, and I was right in the middle of writing this budget out, and I'm like, I didn't want to break from it. They finally talked me into breaking from it, do it. But I'm talking about stuff that I practice, stuff that I'm not just saying this stuff to say something. I'm telling you things that I believe really make a difference in our lives. So you may do a budget another time of year, that's fine. But if you don't have a budget, or if you are in great need of revisiting it, this would be a great time to do that. And one of the things that budgets do is they tell the truth. Budgets will tell you whether you've been faithful to God or not in your tithing. You look at your budget and you can tell. It won't lie to you. It will also tell you whether you've been faithful to save money for your future. It'll tell you. It'll tell you if you've been a generous person. It'll tell you. Your budget will tell you. It will tell you all you need to know. Just look at it carefully and then say, what do we need to fix for next year? What do we need to do differently next year? And then write some goals out. The problem we have with goals sometimes is we write so many goals, it just becomes nothing, meaningless. I would say narrow it down to just a few goals. Just a few goals. Don't overdo it. Just keep them there, a few goals. What about your priorities? What are your priorities? Our tendency is to allow the things that aren't so important to take over the things that are very important, to let the urgent, control the really, really important things. And so look at and say, what do I want to focus on? What am I going to say no to this year? What am I going to say yes to this year? Making your priorities. Values. Put down some of your values. You go, why I can't think of all of them? Well, think of some of them, and then ask yourself, does my budget reflect my values? Am I taking care of my family properly? Am I honoring God appropriately? My goals, my priorities, are they in line with my values? So this isn't rocket science, and it doesn't mean you have to write a book. It's just some basic things that will really, really help us make a difference in next year. And then decide what actions are necessary for the in-between that will help prepare us for the A's and B's of life. So if you live for main events, the main events of life, then you'll have a tendency to downplay the in-between. But I really believe that if you focus more attention on the in-between, it will elevate the A's and B's experiences of the year. It will make them more significant, make them more valuable, more important, because we're better prepared for it. If you think about an Olympic athlete, they didn't just show up that day and go, hey, I want to do the whatever swim meet, They didn't just show up and do that. They've been preparing in between meets. And they've been doing it when no one's been looking. They've been swimming laps, swimming laps, swimming laps, swimming laps, swimming laps. Whenever I drive everybody else crazy, they've still been swimming laps, swimming laps. They've been getting up early. They've been staying up late. They've been working hard. They've been working hard, working hard in the in-between time. That's what makes the gold medal such a great moment. If they didn't do the in-between time, they wouldn't even make it to the medal stand. They probably wouldn't give a chance to be on the team. So it's that in-between time. We know that in our minds, but sometimes we neglect it. Can I just tell you that time is going to pass no matter how you use it? Now, it sounds so simple, but I want you to pay attention to that. Time is going to pass no matter how you use it. And so, I know many people here are actually in the middle of doing education, online education or local education or something like that. And sometimes when you're in the middle of it, it feels like it's too much, I can't do it. And you may have to pull back a little bit. You might have to change a few things. But here's what I know is those 4 years or those 5 years, those 6 years, they're going to pass whether you go to school or not. So if you really value that education, if you really value that degree, or you need it for what you're going to do in your life, then you go ahead in that in-between time and you invest yourself. Here's what I've noticed. Someone who invests themselves in that in-between time, whenever it comes to diploma time, most of the times when they receive that diploma, they don't go find themselves in an easy chair and sit down and go, I made it. Hey, I survived. I'm going to keep my hat and everything here. I'm going to wear my gown. I'm going to wear it 3 days a week. I'm just going to remind myself, I graduated. No, you graduated. That was a big moment, so you can go into another in-between time and make a living. And so we realize and understand those moments are very, very important. They're great celebrations. But what really matters is what you did in the in-between time to get there, or what you do afterward to take care of your family properly. Time will pass no matter how you use it. And we all have different A's and B's. So your A's and B's, your big moments this year are going to be different than mine or other people around you. And so that means we all have different in-betweens. So some of the things I'm going to mention here in closing, you may not consider in-betweens, but some people around you might. And so I'm just going to mention a few of them. Sleeping is an in-between. You go, no, that's a necessity. Well, it is, and it's very important, but it's also about a third of your life. So how you do that might matter. And if you go to a mattress salesperson, they'll remind you of that and explain how do you want to spend 1/3 of your life, And so you can. I'm not looking at anybody in here either, because anyway, just how does this stuff happen to me? I don't know. I get myself in these situations. I can recommend a really good mattress salesperson to you, I guess is what I'm saying, if you really need it. But and I know part of their speech, and I've never even talked to them about it. But here, for me, sleeping is more than just sleeping. Sleeping, I do take it seriously in a couple ways. One is because it's time it's going to be spent. You're going to be there. And I don't know, it does seem like the older you get, more appreciation you have for sleep. And then sometimes when you get older, have you ever had those seasons or times when something's going on and you kind of had a hard time sleeping? Those aren't fun either. But so for me, I'm careful for a season of time. I don't have an exact time, but for a season of time about what I focus on before I go to sleep. In other words, I don't read email right before I go to sleep. That's not how I go to sleep. I don't look at Facebook, and I'm not on Facebook, but sometimes I cheat and look at Angie's, see what all you guys are doing out there. But anyway, so I don't look at Facebook because you know what? People have crisis. And if someone puts on there that their best friend just got killed in a car accident, that's going to cause me not to sleep so well, or it's going to give me a little more trouble because I'm going to be concerned about that. I'm willing to pray for them, but I can, and so if they call me and I'm going to pray, but just because I read Facebook, and I can't take on the issues of the world. So I try to kind of clean my deck a little bit before I go to sleep. And then I choose what I put on my mind before I go to sleep. Sometimes I use sleeping as a way to solve problems. So there's something, just in the last month, there's been 2 times I've gone to bed with something that I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't make it work. And so my prayer was, as I went to sleep, God, if there's some other way for me to look at this, just show me. And I didn't have a dream. I didn't have an angel come to the foot of my bed and go, hey, Rod, behold, I bring you good, I didn't have any of that happen. But when I woke up the next morning, I had a solution. And I don't even know, it just, ideas started coming to my mind that I hadn't thought of before. It wasn't some big dream, some announcement from God. It just was, but it was a prayer request that I had. And so I don't know how the brain works and all that, but somehow, like that computer disk, it stirred around enough to where all of a sudden I saw a couple options I didn't see when I went to bed. You go, did that make it for a bad night's sleep? No, I slept like a baby. Man, I was, but I will do that. I'll say, God, help me tonight while I'm sleeping in this time, this in-between time. Give me perspective on this. Eating is an in-between time. Very delicate subject for me here. But, and I'm glad to see Jeff's not up there. But anyway, what do you do while you're eating? You could talk to somebody, have a conversation. You could have a little bit of solitude. You could have a little bit of downtime. You could, of course, I know you could check your Facebook and all that too, or whatever, or you could post, I'm eating at so-and-so, aren't you mad? Or what, but what do you do? Because that's kind of a downtime. It's kind of an in-between time. At work, it's a break at work. What do you do with that? There's a lot of good you can do, and it might be the rest. It might be the, right? I'm always happy if I have a yellow pad and pen with me. I'm happy with that if I'm not meeting somebody. What do you do at red lights? This is delicate for me too. But what do you do at red lights? Do you know that the studies say that about 6 months of your life are going to be spent at red lights? So how are you going to spend those 6 months? Just something to think about. Work. Work's not in between. That is my life. That's who I am. Well, that's good. I'm glad for you. But it's an in-between time between you and your family. Well, how do you handle that? How do you I've been in stores before, and some employee standing around going, oh, man, I got 3 hours still. I still got 3 hours. And I'm going, man, I would hate to live like that. If you're looking at the clock like that, I got to be here 3 more hours. That would be miserable. And you go, well, you don't have that job. I know I don't have that job, but I would still try to make it more interesting that. If it felt like this big in-between time until I could get off and go see my friend, I would still try to make it meaningful. Make in-between time meaningful. It's your work, make it meaningful. Make it, you have a part of that. In the evening, when you come home, do you know evenings are not made for you to be grouchy? They're not made for you to cuff the kids and kick the dog around. They really weren't made for that. They were made for you to refresh yourself, renew yourself the next day, take care of business, do what you need to do. Weekends. Some people only live for the weekend. But what do you do on the weekend? Well, you're right here this morning. I think you're in a pretty good place. Not because I'm here, but just because it's where we meet with God at the beginning of the week. So that's awesome. What do you do in your morning time? Oh, I just can't stand mornings. I can't either. Well, just sing to yourself in the shower, do something, whatever. But make some use of that. What do you do? Some people live for vacation. I don't have vacation time for 10 months. I'm just going to hang in there and barely survive till I can get to that vacation time. Well, let me just tell you something. But vacation time will go like that, and you'll be right back doing what you're doing. So figure out what to do with the in-between time, okay? You say, Rod, where are you headed with all this? Now, I'm going to ask you, where are you headed with all this? Where are you headed with it? What are you going to do with your in-between time? Because guess what? This really is a sermon about, well, if you'll just do better, if you'll just try a little harder. This is a sermon, really, if you go back to our context. Jesus created you. He made you. He came to redeem you. And either you're going to him at death or he's coming to you. What's your conversation going to be like about the meantime? Well, God, you are scary. I'm really afraid of you, and so I dug a hole and put my head in it. I didn't do too much on this life. Or are you going to have taken some treasures with you? And I don't mean money. Are there going to be some people whose lives have been deeply impacted, affected? Is God going to look at you and say, well done, good and faithful servant? Is he going to say, wicked, lazy, Tom, what did you do? You didn't even do the least you could do. That's pretty serious. It's not just about how to live a better life next year, how to get a few more things done, how to be more effective. It's about answering to God for what he has entrusted us to do with our lives. Jesus,